It began with a compliment. Innocent enough, or so I thought. "You look great today," Chris said, his voice smooth as velvet. His eyes lingered on mine just a fraction too long, igniting something in me I hadn't felt in years. My pulse quickened. And though I should have laughed it off and returned to my desk, I didn't. David and I had been married for 8 years. He was a good man, steady, hardworking, dependable. Our life was stable, comfortable even. We had a modest home in the suburbs, and his long hours as an accountant kept us financially secure. But somewhere between the routines and responsibilities, I began to feel invisible. David didn't notice when I changed my hair or wore a new dress. He rarely asked about my day anymore. His focus was always on work, bills and long-term plans, as if the present had become irrelevant. Our marriage had become a quiet rhythm, predictable and safe, but lacking the spark it once had. And then there was Chris. Chris had a magnetic presence, the kind of man who commanded attention simply by entering a room. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a confidence that seemed unshakable, he exuded a charm that was impossible to ignore. His perfectly tailored suits, polished shoes, and the faint, expensive cologne that lingered when he walked by made him stand out. At first, our conversations were casual. "Did you catch the game last night? How's the project coming along?" But there was an undercurrent, a quiet energy between us I couldn't ignore. Chris had a way of making me feel seen, as though I wasn't just another colleague, but someone worth noticing. One Friday evening, as the rest of the office cleared out, we found ourselves working late to meet a deadline. The room was quiet, the fluorescent lights casting a soft glow. "You're always so dedicated," Chris said, leaning casually against my desk. I glanced up, surprised. "It's part of the job." "No," he said, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. "It's more than that. You're different, special." The word hit me like a thunderclap. Special. No one had called me that in years. I tried to laugh it off, but the intensity in his gaze made it impossible to ignore. From that night on, something shifted. I started looking forward to work in a way I hadn't in years. I spent more time on my appearance, choosing outfits I thought Chris might notice. And he did. His compliments became more frequent, each one reigniting a spark I hadn't felt in ages. The guilt was subtle at first, a whisper in the back of my mind I could easily ignore. After all, it wasn't like I was doing anything wrong. Flirting wasn't a crime, was it? David barely noticed me anymore. Could I really be blamed for wanting to feel desired? Then came the message. "Lunch, just us." I stared at the words on my screen, my hands trembling. Part of me knew I should decline, but instead I typed back, "Sure." We met at a small Italian restaurant tucked away from the bustle of the city. Sitting across from Chris, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The conversation flowed effortlessly, his laughter lighting up the room in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When he reached across the table to brush a crumb from my cheek, a jolt of electricity shot through me, leaving me breathless. That night, as I sat at the dinner table with David, I felt like a stranger in my own home. David was oblivious to my distraction, his attention on work and his new client. Later, lying in bed next to him, I checked my phone one last time. A message from Chris. "I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Every instinct told me to delete it, to pretend it never happened. But instead, with trembling fingers, I typed back, "Me too." From there, the line between harmless and dangerous began to blur. Our lunches became a regular occurrence. Secluded cafes, quiet restaurants, places where no one would recognize us. At first, it was just a conversation. He asked about my dreams, my passions, the parts of me I felt had been buried under years of routine. "You deserve to be happy," he said one afternoon, his hand resting lightly on mine. "You deserve someone who truly sees you." I didn't pull away. Soon the stolen moments became bolder. Empty conference rooms, lingering goodbyes in the parking lot after everyone had left. The first time Chris kissed me, it was raining. We were standing under the awning of a small diner, waiting for the storm to pass. He turned to me, his gaze intense. And before I could think, his lips were on mine. It was everything I didn't know I'd been craving. Passion, excitement, the undeniable feeling of being wanted. I kissed him back, clutching his shirt as the rain poured around us. For a fleeting moment, I forgot everything. David, my marriage, the life I was risking. That night, when I got home, I couldn't meet David's eyes. He sat on the couch, flipping through channels, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. It all started with a simple compliment, but that moment turned my world upside down. "You look great today," Chris had said, his voice smooth like velvet. His eyes lingered on mine just a second too long, and my pulse quickened in a way I hadn't felt in years. I should have walked away. I should have laughed it off and returned to my desk, but I didn't. I've been married to David for 8 years. He's a good man, steady, hardworking, and dependable. Our life together isn't perfect, but it's stable. We own a modest home in the suburbs, and he works long hours as an accountant. Somewhere along the way, though, Routine became our comfort zone, and I started to feel invisible. David didn't notice when I changed my hair or wore a new dress. He didn't ask about my day anymore. His focus was always on work, bills, and future plans. In the rhythm of our lives, I became just another part of the furniture. And then there was Chris. Chris is the kind of man who commands attention the moment he enters a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding confidence. He makes people want to be near him. His suits are always perfectly tailored, his shoes polished to a shine, and he smells of expensive cologne. At first, our conversations were casual. Did you catch the game last night? Or how's the project coming along? But there was an energy between us that I couldn't ignore. Chris had a way of making me feel seen, like I wasn't just another colleague, but someone worth noticing. One Friday afternoon, we were stuck in the office late, finishing a deadline. The rest of the team had left, and it was just the two of us in the quiet, dimly lit space. "You're always so dedicated," he said, leaning against my desk. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. I laughed nervously. "It's part of the job." "No," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "It's more than that. You're different. You're special." I froze, unsure how to respond. No one had called me special in years. My heart raced as I tried to brush off the comment, but the way he looked at me made it impossible to ignore. After that night, things began to change. I started looking forward to work in a way I hadn't before. I spent extra time on my appearance, choosing outfits I thought Chris might notice. And he did. His compliments came more frequently, each one feeling like a spark in the monotony of my life. The guilt started small, a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I tried to push away. Flirting wasn't a crime, was it? Besides, David barely noticed me anymore. Could I really be blamed for wanting a little attention? But the line between harmless and harmful is thinner than we realize. One afternoon, Chris sent me a message. "Lunch? Just us." I hesitated for a moment, staring at the words on my screen. My hands trembled as I typed back, "Sure." We met at a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from the office. Sitting across from him, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. The conversation flowed easily, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. When he reached across the table and brushed a crumb from my cheek, I felt a jolt of electricity that made my breath catch. That night, as I sat at the dinner table with David, I couldn't stop thinking about Chris. I felt like a stranger in my own home, the weight of my secret pressing down on me. David didn't seem to notice my distraction. He was too busy talking about a new client at work. Later, as I lay in bed next to him, I checked my phone one last time. There was a message from Chris. "I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it had never happened. But another part, a darker, lonelier part, wanted to reply. And so, with shaking fingers, I typed back, "Me too." The thrill of Chris's message lingered in my mind long after I sent my reply. I knew I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. But the temptation was too strong. Our interactions at work grew bolder. He'd lean over my desk, his hand brushing mine as he handed me a file. His compliments became more intimate, his words laced with a charm I couldn't resist. Chris had a way of making me feel alive, like I was someone worth pursuing. Soon, our lunches became a regular thing. We found secluded spots, cozy restaurants or quiet cafes tucked away from prying eyes. At first, it was just a conversation. He'd ask about my life, my dreams, the things I felt I'd lost along the way. "You deserve to be happy," he said one afternoon, his hand resting lightly on mine. "You deserve someone who sees you." I didn't pull away. Instead, I let his words sink in, filling a void I hadn't even realized was there. But lunches weren't enough. Soon we began stealing moments at work, finding empty conference rooms or lingering in the parking lot after everyone else had left. Every touch, every whispered word felt like a secret we were both desperate to keep. The first time Chris kissed me, it was raining. We were standing under the awning of a small diner, waiting for the storm to pass. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. Before I could think, his lips were on mine. It was everything I didn't know I'd been craving. Passion, excitement, the feeling of being wanted. I kissed him back, my hands clutching his shirt as the rain poured around us. For a moment, I forgot about David, my marriage, and the life I was risking. That night, when I got home, David hugged me as I walked through the door. The scent of Chris's cologne still lingered on my clothes, and I froze, terrified he'd notice. "You smell different," he said, his arm still around me. I pulled away quickly, laughing nervously. "New perfume. Do you like it?" "It's nice," he said, but his tone was uncertain. The guilt was becoming harder to ignore, but every time I saw Chris, all my doubts melted away. I was living a double life, and I knew it couldn't last. But I couldn't stop. David barely looked up from the couch as I walked in. "Long day?" he asked, his voice calm but distant. "Yeah," I mumbled, slipping off my shoes and heading straight to the bathroom. Inside, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My lipstick was smudged, Chris's kiss still lingered on my skin. A wave of guilt washed over me, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, a current of excitement still pulsed, undeniable and electric. Chris and I grew bolder after that first kiss. Lunchtime rendezvous in his car became stolen afternoons at motels. Each time I told myself this is the last time. Each time I broke that promise. David started to notice the changes. "You've been distracted lately," he said one night over dinner. His voice was calm, but his eyes searched mine. "Is everything okay?"